Hello, my name is Barry Bussey, and I thought I'd just share a few moments about what's happening here in Ottawa this weekend. I came up here because I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated with the stories that people have as to the reasons why they're here. I want to find out what motivates them to come into a place where you got minus 34 with the wind chill, to be able to make a statement, to have the opportunity to let their opinions and their views be known. This is not something that people have taken lightly. They've traveled across the country, been at great expense. Many of them, of course, have had to drive simply because they're unable to fly as a result of them being unvaccinated. And you know, it's fascinating as I was listening or reading the comments being made on my Facebook page with respect to a picture that I posted. That picture gives, in essence, a metaphor like the children of Israel who are being led across the Red Sea. And in this artist's conception, the truckers are going from oppression to the promised land. At least that's the hope, that's the prayer for many as they come into Ottawa. Many, of course, expressed a sense of unease with that picture from some of the comments that I read. And yet, I think the artist makes a good point. Our previous experiences in life, the history that we have, helps guide us to understand the present and directs us with respect to the future. So, from the artist's perspective, looking back through the history, where are there examples of individuals and groups that have been oppressed, that have to go, as it were, into the promised land? I was fascinated some years ago when Desmond Tutu, he was of course a Anglican bishop. I remember him one day in a speech, and he had his Bible, and he held up his Bible and he said, "Did you think when you brought this book here to the continent we weren't going to read it?" And as to part of the motivation for him and his life work of speaking against the racist regime that he grew up and lived in. And so people come at religious perspectives in different ways, and those stories of the past help explain the present. And I think that's important for us to be able to recognize. And of course, not everyone's going to have the same view, and obviously they don't, but I think it's important for us to be able to look through the lens of those who have a different view than ourselves. On that score, I was interested yesterday while I was up on Parliament Hill to see a young man come up, and he had a great big sign, and the sign said, "Vaccines save lives." And of course, here it is, he's coming into this protest, which the vaccine is indeed one of the issues as to the reason why the truckers are even here. Sure enough, he engaged with some people as they confronted him with respect to his sign. But I thought that was an interesting event. Great illustration, really, of the importance of Canada, that he felt comfortable enough that he was able to come in the mix of a group with a different opinion than himself, and he could express his own opinion. And I think that's extremely important, to be able to look through the eyes of the other, to be able to look through the eyes of the conscientious, and then the conscientious to look through the eyes of those who do not see it as a conscience issue. You know, Martin Luther was a Protestant reformer who said that he could not change his stand because to go against conscience, he said, was neither right nor safe. And we see all kinds of examples of this throughout history. And so I say to those who do not understand the conscientious on this issue of the vaccine, to try to see the world through their eyes. They have taken a position wherein they have lost their jobs, they have lost their income, they have ending up having to pay serious consequences, which of course I read through the comments of those on Facebook who said, yes, well, you know, they're suffering the consequences. Yes, they are. Now, historically in Canada, we showed tremendous amount of respect to those who, for conscience sake, could not do whatever the government commanded. For example, in World War II, I did a study of World War II veterans, talked to about 30 men who at that time were in their late 80s. Many of them have now since passed. They shared with me how it was that they decided for their conscience sake they could not bear the rifle. And so what did Canada do? Well, Canada treated them the same as they did, well, almost the same as they did with the conscripts. You had to serve the exact same amount of time as the regular conscript, but instead of doing your military training, you were sent involved working on public works projects, whether it was helping building roads, helping with expanding national parks and those kinds of things. The point of the matter is, if we look back to the past, we would see a Canada that was accommodating. We see a Canada that was willing to respect the religious opinions and the conscience of its citizens. Canada made agreements with various religious groups, particularly the Mennonites, Hutterites, and so on, when they were over in Europe, Eastern Europe, that if they were to come to Canada and populate, open up the West, that Canada would recognize their conscience to have their own religious schools, their conscience not to bear arms. And by and large, Canada has been true to that promise. So today now, we've got another situation of conscience. Not everyone agrees it's an issue of conscience. I understand that. In fact, some religious groups have pointed out, well, if any of our church members say that that's an issue of conscience, well, you know, it's not in our view, which of course has created quite a controversy within those religious communities. But the point of the matter is, our constitutional law with respect to conscience, Section 2A of the Charter of Human Rights, states very clearly that it's the individual right. And so individuals have a choice in Canada to be able to speak their mind with respect to their conscience. And it is to be respected in the law. Now, there are a number of cases ongoing right now, and we'll find out as time goes on exactly how that'll all work out. The point of the matter that I want to raise is that we have had a history of protecting conscience. We did it for the Jehovah's Witnesses when they were basically being mistreated by the various government officials in Quebec in the 1950s and 60s. The Supreme Court of Canada there, with Justice Ivan Rand, made it very clear that there were what he called first freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, which is a subset of conscience, and the inviolability of the person. In other words, that the state must respect the person's choice with respect to their body, and that cannot arbitrarily detain a person and so forth without the proper rule of law. We are in this situation now where the state has said, we are going to make life very difficult unless you accept our position on the vaccine. This is unusual territory for Canada. It's unusual in many, many ways. There's a whole debate about the efficacy of the vaccine, and one could get into that. And I recognize, you know, I'm not a medical person, I'm a lawyer, but the reality is I've also looked at the various arguments and so forth, and I've made up my own mind on the matter, but this is the point. Each person is to make up their own mind on the matter. We are seeing a lack of respect for the rights of individuals. And I know that people say, well, you know, it's their consequence. If they make a decision, it's their consequence. It's not that they have freely made that decision. It is a decision, as I explained, like those in the past. It's who they are. To go against the conscience is neither right nor safe. Is it the fact that the government is making life more difficult for people than is necessary? Is this almost kind of like a vendetta of some sort, where you are simply saying, if you don't follow our edict, then you will lose your job, you will all of that? That's a question that needs to be asked. We need to have Parliament open. We need to have an opposition party that is going to ask the government of these questions. What we see currently right now is a segment of the Canadian public who have said that they have not been heard. Nobody is listening to them. For those who have not suffered, in fact, a lot of people during the pandemic have actually gained more wealth. And we've seen that. They've gained more wealth over the last 2 years. But there's a lot of hurting people out there. They understand their so-called consequences to be unjust. Unjust because they question whether it was necessary for them to lose their job. For example, we all know of individuals who work out of home are still denied their job, even though they're not meeting with anybody and would be absolutely of no danger to anyone. When we get this mindset or lack of trust between the governed and the governor, then we have some serious political issues that are ultimately going to have to be addressed. And so, in our democracy, we allow people to protest. We allow them to express their views. And that is really what is in essence happening with respect to this truck convoy. It is important for us to be able to look beyond our own situation, our own condition. We may have had our jobs, haven't lost 1 cent during this pandemic, and therefore it's very difficult to put yourself into another person's shoes. But I think it's important for us to do so. It's important so that we can understand. And for those of you who do have the conscientious position not to be vaccinated and suffer the consequences, it's important, I think, for you to also understand those who are vaccinated, who take the position that they do, and that you see through their eyes that perhaps it's very difficult for them to empathize because they haven't experienced what you've experienced. They have not had the same conscientious conviction that you have. So I think we've come to a place in Canada right now where we need to respect one another. We should not be calling each other all those nasty names that some politicians are using against the other. We instead need to respect one another. And we need to respect the right of people to be able to protest and to be able to let their voices be heard. We are all on a piece of real estate that we call Canada. And it's important for us that if we are going to continue living peacefully, we need to allow each other the opportunity to be able to speak, to have that freedom of speech, to have that freedom of conscience, and to be able to protect the person and their conscience as to what is going to be done or not done with respect to their body. And yes, there's also a responsibility to our neighbors, and that is an important principle. But does it have to be done in such a draconian manner as being implemented right now across the country? There's a lot of people who've said, no, it could be done in a much better, more respectful manner than what's being done right now. So the conversation continues. And I plan to continue this conversation, though there will be many people who will disagree with my position. And that's okay, because we are in a free country after all. If you'd like to see more on these kinds of issues, then I encourage you to go to firstfreedoms.ca. And there, I've started the First Freedoms Foundation, myself and others across Canada, because of the concerns that we have with the loss of freedom. But we're not wanting to be provocateurs. We're not wanting to make noise for the sake of noise. But we want to sit down. We want to have a conversation. And I hope and I pray that we'll be able to do so that we can ensure that we have a country that is indeed a true country, a strong country, a country that we can be very proud of, and to be able to pass on to our children and our children's children with the great hope and faith and courage that we will be able to, as it were, come to a place where we can respect the other. And I think that's all we ask, and that's all I think we can expect. So thank you for your time. Please consider giving a donation to help defend the rights of all Canadians by giving at firstfreedoms.ca.